So, how do I build a realistic, or how do I write a good sci-fi or fantasy fictional story? Right. There are a couple of rules I give myself because I do a lot of writing of sci-fi, particularly sci-fi and fantasy, or what in my case you call sci-fi fantasy, because I kind of blend the two a lot most of the time when I write. But there are a couple of rules I give myself, especially if you're going to write something large. The first thing is your world building, because everything you're going to be doing in that story is going to be stuck in the world you create. And a lot of times I go through books and I see the world, and the world is completely um, strange. Like I'm a stranger to the world that is created. You don't want to do that when writing because you want the reader to be able to exist in the world that they're reading. One of the interesting things about a good book is it kind of traps the reader in the story and puts the reader in the book. So the reader is able to speculate the actions the characters are going to make and puts them and just kind of sees themselves in that story. It's That's going to be a little hard to do if the world is completely foreign to the reader, completely. So what you do, the best sci-fi and fantasy books, most of the time, what they do is they change something little, just one or two things change, and now that thing that changes, of course, it has to have a consistent um, effect throughout the book. But when handling world building, the first thing you want to do is you want to set when writing, you want to settle on your world building, and to do world building perfectly or in a good way. What I would advise is you just change certain little things, and then try and be consistent with the effect of that change. For example, if you have a world with two moons, for example, then you it will be normal for there to be a lot of tidal events, like more like a lot that has to do with the water or with the ocean or with the sea. If you have a world the where the sun is not white hot but probably blue, then there'll be a difference in color scheme on the earth. So those things that are actual factual that affect the world, or a world without gravity or with low gravity, you find out that it's going to affect movement and even communication. So you kind of just spread through that. So change one thing and that changes a lot. So you don't have to start trying to change a bunch of things or create a bunch of new things. Like sometimes people create a whole different type of agricultural system and make it that the mountains grow downwards and or the buildings are all floating without giving a reason why. You have one natural law that you shift, you can create an entire world from that without struggling to and without falling into being incoherent with your writing. Another thing you want to be careful about is, so also before I go on, you want to also try to imitate the real world as much as you can so that your reader can go along with it. Let natural laws mostly work. Um, if you're also going, the second thing that I think is important is you want to define the type of work you're doing. So if it's hard sci-fi or soft sci-fi or hard fantasy, soft fantasy, and what this means is like with hard sci-fi, you're trying to actually be scientific, so you're trying to go for facts. With soft sci-fi, it's more like speculation. It's almost fantasy, right? So I'll give an example. If you've read the book The Martian, that's very hard sci-fi because you're going through it and you're having so many technical terms and you can't understand jack that's being said, right? But then um if you go through something like Red Rising, for example, or the Sun Eater series, that's soft sci-fi because you don't need to. There's not much reality in what they're saying. Of course, there is reality, but it's mostly theories that cannot really be tested. So it's more speculative. The belief that one day people will be able to figure that shit out. So you start that way, and that kind of directs how you move with your story. Most sci-fi series that do very well tend to be soft sci-fi, because with soft sci-fi they kind of like it kind of bridges the gap between reality and fantasy, right? While with hard sci-fi it's kind of very geared into what's going on. The engineering is accurate, the calculation is accurate. You're not just doing magic right there. It's kind of like um three-body problem, right? It's kind of difficult to follow because you have to pay attention to what's going on. The same with fantasy. The fantasy with the magic system is going to be hard or soft, because with a hard magic system, for example, I'll use what's this book? Um, Brandon Sanders. Brandon Sanderson's um, Stormlight Archives. How could I forget that? Stormlight Archives. The magic system is quite interesting there, but they are very controlled. You don't just go doing magic; they all kind of connect. You um, the way you deal with metals and things like that. It's a very interesting magic system, but it's one that you have to understand. It's almost like a science, where magic is almost like a science. So you find out in that you could also, but also in a lot of lit RPG right now, lit RPG writings, you kind of see that um, because you have regulations to how you can use your magic, right? In soft sci-fi and soft fantasy, you don't really have that. It's kind of like Lord of the Rings, where the wizard just has powers, and there are no categories on the powers the wizard has, except the to the degree in which they can perform them, right? So the wizard can produce fire, he can produce water. He might not be able to produce enough fire to burn down the city, but he can do everything. Then maybe he gets a magic stone, and then he does that. Similar to like um if you've read the Spellmonger series, you notice that it's kind of very soft sci-fi, where soft fantasy, where you can just do whatever the hell you want. So you have to come to terms with deciding which route you want to take. Another route you can look through is or the third thing that's important for me is the characters, right? How are you going to deal with your characters? So usually you're going to write in one of three ways most of the time. You're either going to write in first person, present tense, or past tense, or you're going to be writing in third person. Now, in third person, you could split that also to limited or omniscient, but it's still practically the same thing you're going to be doing. Now, the viewpoint you choose will definitely affect your character building, because if you're writing from the first person, then we exist within the world of the protagonist, right? Or at least most of the time we exist within the world of the protagonist. In The Great Gatsby, um, the narrator is not necessarily Gatsby is the protagonist, but he's not necessarily the viewpoint. But in most books, the protagonist is the viewpoint, and depending on which depending on which style you take, it affects how that functions. So if you're writing from in past tense, you will notice that the the narrator should be more coherent in what he's saying, because if you're telling a story that has happened before, you're recalling the story, and there are a lot of details that have come in that you probably missed a while ago. So there's a lot more information in that type of writing, and it's more personal. If you're writing in present tense, which you see, which has become more frequent today, is you kind of don't have the luxury of seeing everything. And it's very fun because I see some people do that. They're writing in first person present tense, and they are aware of everything all the time, or the narrator is aware of everything all the time. That's not how life works. Like if you're getting beat up, for example, you can't see the face of the person beating you up. Like if you've ever been punched in the face and you're on the ground being stomped. So imagine, let me give an example. You hear something like, he kicked me in the belly, he um, grinned while stomping at me, and the light reflected on his one good eye. All those things are difficult details to think about while you're getting beat up. While you're getting beat up, what's going through your mind is if you're going to survive that, you're thinking about the pain you're going through. So it's more inward as opposed to outward description. So with first person, you have a lot of first person present tense, you have a lot of inward descriptions. With first person past tense, you do have inward descriptions because you felt those things, but they're more processed and not as raw as the first person present tense. So the reader or the speaker can like go through it kind of in a softer way. While with the third person, the narrator is outside of the events and is outside looking in. So you can describe what the person is feeling and you have a broader view of everything that's going on around, right? The expressions on people's faces now. Those are things you don't have privy to in the first person. So you have to decide what you're doing. And even when you now come to like the character development with other characters, with first person, you only get to spend time with the characters that the protagonist is with at that time. So the only screen time or book time every other character has is while they are with the protagonist. So you you want to make it a point of duty to try and make characters reflect more when they are with the protagonist. And unfortunately, what this does sometimes is it's not unfortunately, but sometimes it makes other characters outshine the protagonist because the writer is trying to make them sing, right? You don't have this problem with the third person viewpoint because you can touch all the characters separately and even jump from head to while you're writing. The next thing is you want to introduce conflict early. You want a lot of books are boring because people find it hard, especially people that don't read much. And if you're trying to get people into reading, most people find it hard getting past the first three chapters if nothing happens, right? So you're reading a book and it's just going on. You've not gotten into the conflict, nothing has happened. You want to kind of establish the conflict early rather than taking the reader through a journey through the West before they get to where something actually happens. As a matter of fact, if you ask me, particularly with sci-fi and fantasy, one of the one of the interesting things to do is to just drop the reader right smack in the middle of the conflict, at least the beginnings of the conflict. Then start from there. If you've watched the Hunger Games movie or even read the book, that's kind of what happens, right? The first few chapters or in the first few minutes in the book, they're already being called out for the games, and you're like, okay, what's going on? There's something already going on here. Or if you've watched Troy, the movie, the 2004 movie with Brad Pitt, it begins with conflict. You know that something is building up. And so you want to introduce the conflict early so that the reader has something that you're looking forward to. Um, the next thing you want to worry about is you want to avoid info dumping, which is you don't want to tell the story of the whole world or every character the moment they show up. So, for example, you meet a man and you meet a character, and let's assume he's a mercenary, and you want to explain that he was a mercenary at this place, and that he fought in these wars, and that this is what he does, these are all his tricks. You want to tell everyone everything about this man. No, let the story reveal itself as time goes on, right? Let the story open up itself to you. Let the people, and even as a reader or as a writer, because you want to let your readers get those experiences, you can, if you have the basic points, but let the story move, you experience the story opening itself up to you in ways that you wouldn't have planned before. When you try to info dump and explain everything you're trying to do at once, it's difficult. Imagine going to class and you're studying physics and the teacher is trying to explain the entire walk from SS1 to SS3 to you in 2 hours. You can't do that. You have to go step by step. So don't dump info on the readers. Don't just throw all the lore. This is all the land. And people try and do that in very funny ways. Sometimes you're talking about something, people are having a discussion, and then they're trying to explain everything. No, you could explain one thing. Something could happen, and you could point out, oh, this is where it happened. This is where that battle happened. And you leave the topic of that battle. You don't need to tell us about the battle. Another time, the battle will come up, and then you can explain that battle then based on something else. So kind of spread out. Don't just dump information on the readers. Um, and I think themes, right? This is important for me. For me, I think stories that are written properly have themes. They have something they're telling you about. Um, for example, The Dance of Shadows, it talks about colonialism. There's lots of musical themes there. Red Rising is oppression, right? And there are all sorts of other mini themes that are within the story. But you want your story to have a point, right? You want it to have something that the reader can resonate with within the world that we live in. That way, the reader can latch onto it, and because the way the mind works, um, con- we like to merge ideas together. So you want to kind of have that done with your writing. Then finally, you want to pace properly. Sometimes you're so if you're writing like action, for example, some action writers are so caught up in the action that they don't leave time for the story. There's no time for dialogue, there's no time for communication, and it's one drama to the other, to the other, to the other, and the reader is just at a constant high. Every once in a while, you need to calm down. And then there's some writers who are just low, and the readers are never brought up to a point where they are stuck with what's going on. You want to kind of pace properly between tension and between calm, and give that sense of structure that kind of makes things better for the reader, to give the reader a very reasonable reading experience. And well, this isn't one of them, but okay, I can put this as one of them. You want to avoid certain things. You don't want to concentrate too much on world building that you forget the character, because no matter how interesting the world is, what makes that world worth living in is the people in the world. So when writing a story, the characters are more important than the world, at least to me. Then the next is you don't want to just throw in a plot twist that came out of nowhere. So if you've written your story and you've made a mistake where you trapped yourself and then you kind of like abracadabraed your way to give um, the hero a way out, then during your editing, you have to point that back somewhere that was possible. You can't just bring out something out of convenience that no one knew was possible and let it happen, right? And so you want to avoid that convenient plot twist, or what some will call plot armor for your protagonist. Where I was watching Naruto, for example. So in the Naruto story, one of the things we know about Kakashi is that he has very low chakra, and his chakra runs out quickly. And then during the war arc, this guy just is just functioning with unlimited chakra, no explanation, nothing. And leaving the readers or the viewers, the readers, to decide why he is not getting tired during a war that's lasting for a couple days. So you have those problems you have to deal with. And yeah, I think if you have that, that's pretty. You have a good story to go by. Um, Please like this video, subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be talking about a lot with writing, with mythology, even with religion, just anything that comes to my mind. And if there are things you want me to talk about, let me talk about it. I've spent the last 15 years of my life reading all sorts of useless things, not useless things, but so this is a good place to kind of share my thoughts on those things and get to know you guys and hear what you guys think about them. Have a good day.